Question number 6 in the name of Deputy Billy Kelleher.
Thank you. Is that grouped?
There certainly is.
There's a good few of them. Yeah, just to say, are we reverting to type again?
Well, in fact, the time will be taken up by this question.
Minister, I suppose we'll cut through the chase in this particular issue. It's already been referred to in a priority question. It's been referred to in private members' business. It's been referred to in this House for the last 2 years plus with regard to the culling of discretionary medical cards. Now, can we just have an acceptance from your side that there is a major problem? This was even acknowledged at the Fine Gael Parliamentary Party. I wish that the Labour Party would acknowledge it as well, and we might get some traction in with regard to a change, not necessarily in the policy, but in the practice of how discretionary medical cards are assessed and awarded.
Thank you. Minister.
At the outset, let me again put on the record of the House, that there is no policy to abolish the awarding of medical cards.
Sorry, I think you're taking a number of questions here.
I should indicate that.
Yeah, please.
I beg pardon. I propose to take questions numbers 31, 21, 6, 12, 7, 18, 39, 42, 35, 48, 23, 58, 9, 45 and 16 together.
Okay.
So I do again say, Count Corder, that there is no policy to abolish the awarding of medical cards on discretionary grounds or to target any patient group, and I welcome Deputy Kelleher's belated acknowledgement that there is no such policy in existence. Neither has there been a change, we'll come to the practice, neither has there been a change in the rules of awarding medical cards on discretionary grounds. The medical card scheme continues to operate so that those who suffer undue financial hardship, as assessed in the published HSE guidelines in the arranging of GP services, are awarded a medical card. While the number of medical cards issued on discretionary grounds has fallen in recent years, this is not as a result of a change in policy or a deliberate targeting of discretionary cards. Rather, it is attributable in the main to the fact that many people, and I can give these figures again, who previously were marginally over the qualifying means thresholds have subsequently been granted medical cards because they now fall under those means thresholds. Of the discretionary medical cards in circulation in 2011, approximately 6% have subsequently been refused a discretionary medical card on review. While the number in this regard may be small, I in no way underestimate the difficulties caused for those who are considered or found to be ineligible. However, the legislation is clear that qualification of a medical card is means tested. As a result, some people have been found to be ineligible because their net income is in excess of the means threshold, sometimes by hundreds of euro per week. As I outlined previously, the HSE is currently examining how individuals who are not entitled to a medical card could still receive services that meet their needs. This issue is being addressed in a manner that includes all of the services and supports provided by the HSE with as much flexibility as is available and at a local level. All medical card and GP visit card holders are subject to a periodic review of eligibility to determine whether they continue to be eligible. The change in the number of existing cards will be dependent on the extent of the ineligibility detected. Given that medical card eligibility is assessed on an individual basis, it is difficult to estimate the number of medical cards that may be awarded on a discretionary basis. It's important to note that where a medical card is withdrawn, irrespective of its having been awarded based solely on the means or whether the HSE has exercised discretion, is not withdrawn due to the cost implications for the HSE. In accordance with the Health Acts, a medical card can only be withdrawn due to eligibility not having been established. The medical card system is founded on the test of undue financial hardship in arranging GP services. Assessment for a medical card is determined primarily by reference to the means, including the income and reasonable expenditure of the applicant on his or her partner and dependents. In the case of a child, the parent's income and reasonable expenditure is assessed. Under the legislation, there is no, nor has there ever been, an automatic entitlement to a medical card for a person with a particular disease or illness. Determination of eligibility for a medical card is the responsibility of the HSE. The HSE, and here's the practice, Count Corder, that was asked to deal with. The HSE has produced national assessment guidelines to provide a clear framework to assist in the making of reasonable, consistent and equitable decisions. The guidelines do not provide for expenditure associated with property taxes or water charges to be included in the determination of means of the applicant. On the issue of water charges, the Department of Health has not been involved in discussions on the exempting or capping of water charges for certain medical conditions, but it is available to do so. As I mentioned earlier, one of the consequences of the transition to a nationally consistent system of assessment has been difficulty at renewal stage for higher income households or persons on relatively higher income, even where an illness or disability is involved. On the initiative of the Minister for Health, the HSE established a panel of community medical officers to assist in the processing of applications for medical cards where the income guidelines were exceeded, but where there are difficult personal circumstances such as an illness or physical disability that may have an impact on the financial situation of the applicant. Medical officers review evidence of necessary medical expenses provided by the applicant. As appropriate, he or she liaises with general practitioners, hospital consultants and other health professionals so that the costs relating to the health circumstances of the applicant can be taken fully into account. At the request of Minister O'Reilly, the HSE is currently examining how individuals who are not entitled to a medical card could still receive services that meet their needs. As I said earlier, this examination relates to all of the services and supports provided by the HSE with as much flexibility as is available and at a local level. Additional information will be provided and local information points will be established at major health centres around the country where members of the public can obtain comprehensive information and support in accessing their full range of supports from the health services. Appropriate notice is also being considered as part of this review for existing medical card holders who may no longer be eligible on renewal, but where serious medical conditions or profound disability continues to exist in the household. The objective is to maximise the supports available for patients and for families. The Government is fully aware of the difficulties caused for those who are considered ineligible. Indeed, one of the key goals of the reform of the health system is to ensure that people receive health care according to their particular needs rather than based on their income. Historically, eligibility for health services in Ireland has been based on a person's means This, I believe, is an anachronistic and inappropriate basis for a health system and is far from any comparable modern health system of any European country. It underpins the importance of moving towards a health system based on universality of access. However, these major reforms take time, and in the meantime, I look forward to seeing proposals from the HSE on how individuals who are not entitled to a medical card could still receive care that meets their needs under the existing health legislation.
Thank you. There are 4 deputies present who have questions here. Deputy Kelleher, Deputy Troy, Deputy Catherine Murphy and Deputy Keaveney. And Deputy O'Callaghan has indicated if we have time. You're entitled to your 2 minutes each.
Yeah, just to say at the outset, look, Minister, I can't or elicit the information as to whether there's been a change in policy or a change in practice. But I do know one thing. There's a change to many people's lives out there in our communities who have had their discretionary medical cards withdrawn, or people who applied on a discretionary basis haven't had it granted. Now, the fact of the matter is, Minister, I've said last night in the Dáil debate that there are advocacy groups that represent people and advocate for people who are consistently highlighting this. We've had the Jack and Jill Foundation, Down Syndrome Ireland, and many other organisations, Irish Cancer Society and others, who have consistently said that there is a change, either in the practice or the policy, but on the ground, in people's lives, it is making a huge impact for the negative. The Ombudsman, Emily O'Reilly, previously, in her report in 2013, stated quite clearly that while there was no discernible change in the terms of policy, how it was implemented and how the discretion was assessed was tightened to the point where it was more and more difficult for officials to grant on a discretionary basis. So there has been changes. Minister, finally, I said last night and I say again, you're asking the old and the sick to pay for the healthy and the wealthy, and that is just wrong.
Minister, 1 minute.
Well, Deputy Keller alleges there's a change in policy, then he says he agrees there isn't a change in policy, and then he says he's not sure whether there hasn't been a change in policy. There has been no change in the policy. It's been made very, very clear that there's been no change in the policy. What has happened is that we've had a standardisation of the application of the procedures and the application of the guidelines which the HSE has in fact published. And I think that's a good thing, and I invite Deputy Kelleher to agree with me that that's a good thing, so that we can ensure that we do not have a repeat of the huge disparities that exist and have existed for so long across the country in relation to the awarding of medical cards based on discretion. There seems to me, and I wonder would Deputy Kelleher like to comment on this, how it is that in early 2013, for example, when you look at the spread of discretionary medical cards or cards granted on that basis across the country, that you can have in one county, it happens to be his own, County Cork, 71%, the number of discretionary medical cards in that county, 71% above the national average. Whereas in a county like Meath, almost 70% below the national average. How can it be that in Cork, for example, Limerick and Tipperary, Laois, Offaly, Clare, Waterford, other counties, you have a massively a higher number of medical cards having been awarded over the years on discretionary grounds and not in these other countries. These are not small differences. These are huge disparities. It's not fair that we have a system that isn't transparent and isn't fair. And I don't know whether the Deputy or his party would prefer to have a system where there aren't actually transparent rules and where people actually have access to services based through some other method. I believe in having a rules-based system and having it applied fairly and transparently and honestly, and that's what we want to achieve.
Deputy Troy.
Thank you, Concordia. Well, the Minister can dress it up any way he wants. And it just confirms to me that a lot of Dublin-based TDs mustn't have clinics because the hard facts and the evidence coming in to every clinic, the length and breadth of the country, if you talk to any TD of any political party or none, will say and cite evidence that these discretionary medical cards are being culled at an alarming rate. I had a woman in the other day who had a mastectomy, her medical card culled. Down Syndrome Ireland, as my colleague has said, a young boy who has Down syndrome, his mother was asked to prove that he still has Down syndrome. Cancer patients, people with motor neurons, the list goes on. And whatever way you want to dress it up, Minister, the simple, hard facts of the matter are people who have a medical need for a discretionary medical card are being deprived of that need. And you come in and talk about setting up information units to inform people of their entitlements. How much are these information units going to cost? Why can't you just give people their entitlements to have enough anxiety, enough worry going through medical conditions without having putting them through more anxiety and more worry, appealing and reapplying for medical cards, which ultimately they're not getting?
Minister.
Are entitled in certain circumstances to have a medical card, and nobody will lose or has lost a medical card who is eligible for it and entitled to it. That is absolutely the case. 6%, and that is the case. Anybody who is eligible for a medical card under the system and under the guidelines will get the medical card. So if there's any circumstance where a TD or otherwise is suggesting that people who are eligible for a medical card are not having the medical card, we need to know about that. Because if they're eligible, they will receive it. The fact is that previously we had a system which was spread across the country, as I've already indicated, which had huge disparities. We now have a fair system. Surely it's much better to have a fair system, to have a consistent system, to have a clear system, so people know where they stand. That's the sort of system that I want to see. I'm not sure if that's the sort of system that the party opposite wants to see. Historically, that's not the way they do business. That's the way I think we should do business in the future. Make sure that we have a proper rules-based system, and then do, as the Minister and I have sought to do, is to take steps to ensure that people who have lost out on a medical card, where they had to rely on it over a number of years, that we ensure that the services are there to back them up, that we make improvements in those services where they're needed, particularly access to those services, information about those services, so there's a proper interaction between the PCRS and the services on the ground. And I accept that we haven't done enough in order to achieve that, and that there are gaps in services that need to be filled, and that's where we're concentrating our efforts to ensure that people get the services that they need.
Deputy Captain Murphy.
We can only say what we're seeing ourselves, and for example, one particular case which I think highlights it very well for me is a family with a little girl who has cerebral palsy. She's just gone 5, and basically she got a medical card based on discretionary grounds after providing very significant information about a little over a year ago. That card then, a card was issued for 3 years. It was reviewed less than a year later, and it's now just on a very short extension. The same information is being sought as was provided before, which is very extensive. Now, this is not just about the child going to a GP. The mother who went public said that she had the card since she was 13 months old. She can't swallow. She's fed through a tube. The food and equipment to deliver the food is covered by the medical card. It covers her €4,000 chair, which has to be adjusted regularly as she grows. She needs physiotherapy to massage her legs, and she needs physiotherapy to help her to make sure her spine is not damaged from being in the chair all of the time. They wouldn't let her out of Crumlin Hospital until she got a medical card. She gets occupational therapy. All of those are provided on the medical card. Look, the reality of it is that this family require the state to be there to support a child who could end up being in hospital in hospital if, because she's at risk if she's not properly cared for and if she's not properly resourced. It's not just about going to the doctor once or twice a year. It's all of the other things that go with that. And these kind of families are being put through absolute purgatory. And, you know, there needs to be, at the very least, until services are in place, there needs to be an extension on these cards where there's children like this that are at risk.
Minister.
Deputy Murphy refers to the services that, I mean, it's very difficult to comment on an individual case, but I entirely trust Deputy Murphy in terms of the veracity of what she's saying in relation to that case. But the point really here is the services that that individual needs, the access to the physiotherapy, the access to the equipment, the access to, for example, different devices, the access to wheelchair. That is what that individual needs, and that's what we have to ensure that that person gets. We're inclined to reduce this whole debate to a card, to an actual physical card. Now, I know that's been the gateway in the past. Traditionally, that's the gateway or the passport to all of these services. But what we want to do is make sure that the services are there, irrespective of the holding of a medical card on the basis of means. So even if that individual, and I wouldn't trespass for a moment, even though we haven't said who it is, I wouldn't trespass on the individual situation of that family. But even in circumstances where a family's means is above, perhaps even significantly above the income test, they still should have access to the services. And that's what we're seeking to do. And by the way, the other issue that comes up in a lot of these cases, again, I'm not saying in this particular case, is a lot of people don't realise that even if they don't qualify for a medical card, they may qualify under the long-term illness scheme. And the LTI is a hugely important scheme where people need to know about. I'm not talking about the case, Deputy Murphy's case. I'm making a general point. There seems to be a gap in the information flow to people. They mightn't be entitled to one particular medical card, but may be entitled to other services, and we need to join all this up.
Thank you. Deputy Keaveney.
Cancórla, I'm loath to reference anecdotal evidence from canvassing on doorsteps in light of the Minister's previous comments. But I would refer the Minister to a senior official of the HSE who last week in Galway said that the removal of discretionary medical cards is indefensible. And yet we have a Minister here defending what he regards as a fair gateway by providing a medical card into aids and appliances. But Minister, you continue with a crusade of taking medical cards away from the most vulnerable people. And I refer you only to the Coyle family who had the medical card taken away from their child who, Alexander, can't walk, he cannot talk, he cannot go to the toilet, and he takes 31 medicines a day, interventions. Your crusade is taking away the medical card. And the language you use vis-à-vis what has been issued, but you don't say what has been called in the reissue. And clearly, there is an inconsistency between your language and the language of John Hennessy, who said that your actions are indefensible. And Minister, it's immoral what's going on.
Thank you.
It's immoral what you're doing to people who cannot defend themselves, that you would write out the parents of Down syndrome and say, is there any sign in the horizon that your child is any better? That is insensitive, and it's equal to the merit of your crusade to rob vulnerable people of a discretionary medical card.
Cancórla, it is true that some of the decisions that we made in respect of the mechanics of how the process is implemented, some of the over-bureaucratising of the process, some of the delays that have happened, some of the mistakes that have happened in the implementation of the system and the administration of the system, some things that have happened certainly are indefensible. There's absolutely no doubt about that in my mind. I have no difficulty repeating that word here, that is so. But I have to say to the House again, Cancórla, you know, and people accuse me of being legalistic about this, and maybe I'm a little bit too legalistic sometimes in my style, but what I want to say is this Cancórla, that the Oireachtas makes the laws. The Minister doesn't make the law. The Oireachtas makes the law. And we have to carry that out. And no Minister, no HSE, the Deputy is very excitable. The Deputy should understand that no Minister can direct the awarding of a medical card, or the HSE cannot direct the awarding of the medical card outside the legislation that this House has actually passed. And the Deputy says that he's reluctant to bring up individual cases, and then of course he goes on to do so. But I can tell him that in relation to the particular court case that he did refer to, that the HSE has been in touch with that family, very sensitively in touch with that family, and are dealing with those issues as best as we can within the available resources and entitlements and eligibility that are there. I think the family would appreciate
Very quickly, Deputy O'Crella.